Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ChMC Masterclass digital event. My name is Natasha, and I'm an events delivery coordinator at CMI, and I'll shortly be handing over to David to begin today's event. If you have any questions during the event, you can ask them using the live chat box to the right of your screen. We shall answer as many as we can during the Q&A. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you later today for those who book to attend. The event recording will also be available on the CMI website and the CMI YouTube channel. Now over to David McLaughlin, ChMC Assessment Manager at CMI, to begin today's event.
Thanks, Natasha, and good morning, everybody. I hope you enjoy this morning's presentation. I'm going to take you through the process give you a little bit of history and then talk about how we do assessment and the sort of things that you need to be ready to deal with and the sort of things you need to consider as you submit your application to become a chartered management consultant. So the first thing really is to think about why. Why do we have chartered management consultant? Well, this came about as a way of benchmarking the quality of consultancy across the industry. There was a drive really to harmonise the inconsistencies that were there in terms of professional standard and practice across the industry, and we wanted to make sure that anybody who had this standard, who was granted the ChMC status, was able to demonstrate quality, was able to demonstrate value for money, quality of service, and really importantly, ethics. And how we determined that was going to be a part of this was in conjunction with a number of firms that were involved in the first stages of this, the initial stages of this pilot. And there were 10 firms involved, and I'll talk about those a little bit more in a moment. So this hasn't been developed solely as almost like a qualification, and it's important to remember that it isn't a qualification. This is a professional status. And if you're granted the professional status, it's done so on a real world basis rather than an academic qualification basis. So having the status enables clients to make informed decisions about buying based on quality rather than just on price. It's it gives you a head and shoulders approach to dealing with clients. If you're dealing with a client and you're pitching to a client and the client notices or recognizes that you have this status, obviously it gives you a foothold and a leverage that other colleagues might not have. So it's about building that benchmark. It's about attracting the best talent that's out there and retaining it. It's about engaging with the best people and the people that meet the benchmark and the standard across the industry. So it's all of those things really, and all of those things were seen to be missing. It was very much, there was lots of good quality, but how do we know it's good quality if we don't interact with the firm? And once you're interacting with the firm, often it's too late. And if you want to then interact with somebody else, there's a difficult process there. So it was all thought up to deal with those kinds of issues. So we ended up with a quality kite mark that demonstrates ethical practice, value and quality across the piece. So when we think about chartered management, we know why it's a chartered management consultant. We know why it's there. Now, what does it mean to be a chartered management consultant? Well, chartered management consultant was awarded to CMI by the Privy Council, and we are the awarding body. We're the only ones that can do this. It was developed in partnership, as I mentioned earlier, with the MCA. So this isn't something we've sat and thought up. This has been developed in conjunction with the industry leaders. It is professional recognition of that high standard, that professional development and achievement that you've demonstrated. Now, I'm going to say you a lot through this presentation because this is about you as an individual, not part of the firm. We know what the firms do. Everybody knows what the firms do. But what do you do? What difference do you make as an individual? And having this status is a way of demonstrating that. It is aligned to an industry-wide competency framework, which was developed with the industry. And that really brings it to life for me because we're looking at real world things, real world scenarios. This isn't academic, and it's really important to remember that. There's a really important piece in this as well. When you go through this process, there's a real opportunity to take some time to self-reflect. And we ask you to do that when you're compiling your submission for assessment. And when we take you through the professional discussion, which I'll talk about in a little while as well, But it is an opportunity to reflect and see where you add value as an individual. And lots of people that have gone before you on this have said that that's the case. You don't often get a chance to stop to think about how I've made a difference, how I've done something that's really important, how I've added value to an organization that I've worked with. We go from one to one to one to one, and it just becomes this never-ending drive, if you like, to do things well. But having that time to stop and reflect and say, do you know what, I am really good at this, is something that we don't always get. So that's an additional value for you when you're going through this process. It is based on hands-on and real practice and real experience, as I say, and I can't say that enough, really, because where people fail, where people fall short of the mark, is where they treat it as an academic exercise. We're not looking at you compiling a thesis here. We're not looking at you compiling an academic submission. We want to know what difference you've really made. This is becoming more and more widely recognised, and now is a good time to get involved at almost at the ground floor level, if you like, because this will become the benchmark for all consultancy across the piece. This is being recognised by the Cabinet Office, and we have Cabinet Office representatives who sit on the oversight board for ChMC. This is really gaining traction now. Now's the time to get involved. Lots of firms involved. I'm not going to read all these out, but lots of firms involved in the process already. Most of these have put people through. Some are still waiting to put people through. The queues are building up. We do have the ability at the moment to turn people over quickly and get them through the process quickly. So, I would encourage you to get your submission in sooner rather than later. But having said that, you need to be ready, and it doesn't want to be rushed as an academic exercise. And I'll talk about that a bit more as we go through as well. Some more firms commencing to start with this now. And again, I'm not going to read these out for you. I'll just leave that there a second so you can see who's involved. And once firms are involved, the feedback that we're getting from individuals and from firms is incredible, really. This has been some of the assessment evaluation. 82% found the process challenging. Now that's really good, because you will appreciate that at the start of this process, most of the people that were coming through were people that were senior people in organizations trying it out for their organization, trying it out for themselves. And if you've got people at that level who are finding this challenging, it really does give it credence and quality. Demonstrates commitment to management consultant as a profession, and I think that's really important as well. And we've seen this with management beforehand, over the last 20 years, how things are being recognized now as a profession. And I think the benefit for management consultancy to be recognized as a serious profession with a status that you can acquire with that benchmark is really, really useful for everybody. 100% of people said it allows them to demonstrate a level of excellence and credibility to clients. You can't ask for more than that. When you're dealing with clients, this status is adding value already, and it will only continue to do so. Lots of feedback about the impact of becoming ChMC as well. Increased self-confidence, increased self-awareness. And this comes from that reflection point, really. As I say, that ability to stop and say, how have I done? What difference have I made? And I think that's really important part of this process as well. So when we think about the process, we think about, how do you get to here? What point are you able to apply to become a chartered management consultant? Well, there are largely two routes to becoming ChMC. One is what we call the on-program route, and that will come after a minimum of 5 years operating as a management consultant. Now, I'm just going to qualify that a little bit. This is not 5 years as a manager. This is not 5 years as a consulting manager. This is 5 years as a management consultant. And that's really important, because that's what we're going to assess you against. Those are the criteria that we're going to assess you against. You need to become familiar with those criteria, because following that will help you achieve the status in a much simpler, much more fluid way. So after 5 years, if you've come off an on-program training, in-house accreditation program, or you've got a professional consulting qualification, you've been operating for 5 years, you can come through that route. If you've been what we call an experienced professional, so you've been operating for at least 7 years, you've got 7 years experience of operating in a management consultant role, in a management consultant environment, then you can also apply through that route as well. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the difference in the two routes as we go through this. So two distinct routes, differences based on experience. This links to a lot of other professional statuses as well, and there is overlap with many different professional statuses. But in order to achieve ChMC, you will need to demonstrate how you meet the chartered level competencies. Now, that is very much about the chartered management consultant. It's not about CMC, although those are good things to have. It's not about chartered manager. Those are good things to have. It's the difference between being a manager and a management consultant, largely, that we will test you with a lot of rigor. And that's where people fall down. People think, I'm a chartered manager, I can go for this chartered management consultant status. Well, if you're not operating as a management consultant, you will have difficulty in achieving this. So it is about going through that professional assessment. It's not just about being a member of a recognized body. It's not about having any other qualifications. However you come to this after 5 years or 7 years, you will still have to go through the same assessment process. So don't think this is a gimme, this is an add-on. It isn't. We are testing this rigorously because we believe this is a benchmark of quality and value for the industry as a whole. So once you're ready for assessment, you will be submitting an application form and a template of evidence in saying how you feel that you meet the ChMC criteria. That submission is then reviewed by one of my assessors, and all my assessors are either operating now or have previously operated as senior management consultants. They all hold the ChMC status, as we all do on the team. So they know what they're looking for. They know what involves in being a management consultant. They've all walked the walk as well as talked the talk. So these are serious professionals who are testing you on that basis, really. So they will have a look at your submission when you put it in. They will look at your written submission, and they will make a decision as to whether or not to take you on to a professional discussion. And that professional discussion is exactly what it says. It's not an interview. It's not a question and answer. It's a discussion between two peers to dig a bit more into what you've said, to qualify what you've written in your written submission. We can all write a good story, but can we back it up? And so that's the purpose of that professional discussion, to dig a bit deeper and to challenge you on some of the areas that you've discussed in your written submission. Your evidence has to be corroborated by a nominated sponsor, somebody who is of good standing in the industry, to say that yes, what you're saying on your written submission is true and valid, and it relates to you. And so that's an important part of the application process. A lot of applications are moderated. I wouldn't say all, because we don't do 100%, but a lot of applications are moderated, and that's done on a random basis with an algorithm that decides who's going to be moderated and who's not. So very often a submission will have more than one pair of eyes on it, and that's a really good practice in assessment. If you're not familiar with assessment already, we do that to ensure quality internally as much as anything else. Once the assessment process is completed, you will be informed of the outcome. Now, the outcome will be one of two things. You will either have completed successfully, in which case you will be awarded the ChMC status and you'll be able to use the designated letters, or you will have failed. Now, this is a pass or fail situation. This isn't continuously going until you get it right. You can fail this, and we have people that do fail this. And if you fail, you then have to wait another 6 months before you can resubmit further application. So this is quite a serious process, and you should take it serious as well. You should take it as a real life pitch, and the pitch is you rather than your business. So we're assessing on a number of areas, and the assessment looks at your management consultant experience, not the firm, not what you do as a team, but what do you do as an individual? How have you made a difference as an individual? So really, it's an opportunity for you to showcase your most notable engagements. Where do you feel you've made the most difference? Where do you feel you've had the biggest impact? Tell us about those things, because they're the things that are going to get you through the process. As I say, it's not about the training. It's not about the evidence of what your organization does. It's all about you. We don't want to know that you've done training. We're not interested in that so much as the fact that you've got the experience and you're ready to take the process on. We know what training you've had. We know what training your firm do. You don't have to fill up your application with all of that. What difference have you made? And we look at a number of areas to this to see how you've made a difference across the piece as a whole. So we look at values, ethics, and behaviors, and this is your ethics and behaviors. What have you done on an ethical basis? How have you been challenged ethically, and what have you done about that? We look at your leadership and management skills, how you lead others, how you manage yourself, how you lead yourself, all of those areas. We look at the client operating environment. How do you interact with clients? How do you make a difference to clients? And then really, really importantly as well, we look at your professional and personal development. So what have you done to get you to this point? And what do you plan to do in the next 12 months to keep you on top of your game? If you're awarded this status, what are you going to do over the next 12 months to stay on top of your game, to do the horizon scanning, to still make sure you're offering value and you're up to speed with what clients are wanting and how you're going to develop yourself? We all know if we stand still, we just become dinosaurs, and look what happened to the dinosaurs. So we have to continually keep developing ourselves in order to stay ahead of the game and stay on top of the market. So we will test you on those things as well. We will assess you on those. And with that in mind, if you're awarded the status, every 12 months we will come to you potentially and we will say, give us your CPD. What have you done about continuous professional development over the last 12 months? This is what you said you were going to do. What have you done? And if you've done something different, why? And if you haven't done anything at all, we will give you one opportunity to tell us what you've done. If you don't respond, we'll give you an opportunity to tell us what we've done. And if we still don't hear from you or you haven't done enough, we will then move to remove your ChMC status. So it's really important to think about this. What have I done to get me here? How good am I? And what am I going to do to stay at the top of my game? All of those things you need to think about. Now, just a quick forethought before we get into the detail of the assessment process. There are two ways to look at this, and personally, I like the 6 serving men by Kipling from The Elephant's Child. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. The names are what and why and when and how and where and who. And personally, I use these 6 serving men in lots and lots of ways, and I use them probably every day in things I do. And what you can think about in terms of gathering your evidence is, what did I do? Why did I do it? When did I do it? How did I do it? Where did I do it? And who did I do it for? And you can think about all of those things in terms of gathering evidence. Now, the other tool that some people like to use is what we call the STAR technique. So you think about the situation. What was happening? What was the task? What did I have to do? What action did I undertake? And what happened as a result of that? So 2 different tools there to think about when you're collecting evidence and reflecting on your own performance and reflecting on your own experience in order to get you to the point where you can hopefully be awarded ChMC status. So you've compiled all this evidence and we're looking at it, and we're looking at the evidence in a number of ways. We want to make sure that it complies with what we call VAX. And VAX is about the evidence being valid. So the evidence is in there to relate to the competencies. Now, you think that's a bit strange, but when you're submitting evidence, make sure you're only submitting evidence that relates to the competencies. We're not looking for weight here. We're not looking for fluff. We're looking for you to be as accurate, brief, and concise as possible about the evidence you supply. Make it easy for my assessors to say, yes, you meet the criteria. I'm going to take you on to the professional discussion. That's what we're going to do. And you need to make it as easy as possible for them to do that. Align your evidence to the criteria. Don't make them go hunting and fishing. Because if they go hunting and fishing, you know what it's like, human nature. If you have to search for something, you've already got somebody on the back foot. So make it easy for them to say yes. The evidence has to be authentic. It has to be relating to you and you alone and your performance. We don't want to know what your team does. Now, if you're part of a team, what did you do as part of that team? Not the team as a whole. We don't want to see any we's in there. We did this and we did that and we made this difference. What difference did you make? This is all about you. It has to be current evidence. But what do we mean by current evidence? Is evidence that's still relating to the knowledge, skills, and behaviors which meet the competencies. Now, as I give you an example of that, my first degree was in IT. I haven't worked in the IT environment for probably about 12 years now. So my competency around IT is not current because I don't use it. I can say I've got a degree, great, but when did I last fix anything in terms of IT? When did I last program something? When did I last do that? It was now no longer current. So think about things that are current. Now, if you've, like me, you've got a degree that goes back a long way, or you've got some experience that goes back a long way, and you can demonstrate that you're still using that and you're still making use of that skills and knowledge and understanding, then fine, keep it in, but don't rely on things that you no longer use. And the last one really is sufficient. Is there sufficient evidence to enable the assessor to say yes? Let's move on to the professional discussion, because they're everything I want here. Now, if you don't supply sufficient evidence, the assessors will come back to you and ask you for more. And you get one opportunity to do that. So you get an opportunity to submit in the first place, and you get one opportunity to polish it. If you don't polish it at that stage, you're not going to go on to the professional discussion. So do whatever you can to make sure that it's as close as possible the first time you submit. So you've got your written submission. There's only one template, but the template has 6 sections on it. Now, if you're an experienced professional, you only need to complete 5. If you are coming at this from for 5 years and off a training route, you need to complete all 6 sections. That's made very clear on the template itself. Once you've got through that stage, we take you on to a professional discussion. And then after that, as I say, the continuous professional development will be checked every year. So make sure you keep that up to date as well. I've lost some slides here. Sorry, excuse me about this. So some key points for you really. It's about the difference that you make. Why should we take you onto the professional discussion? Why should we take you onto that stage where we're going to make you stand up and justify what you've written in your written submission? Why should we award you the status in the first place? So tell us all about you. Would someone you don't know make sense of what you've written in your written submission? Now, this is a really good question, because it's very easy to get into the woods of this and not see the trees, because we think we know what we think we've written, and we think we see what we think we've written. And to us, it makes sense because we are in that process. We are looking at that every day. We're using that language. We're talking about these things all the time. We know what the language and the jargon means. Would somebody outside of your team, outside of your organization, potentially know what you're talking about? And if they wouldn't, and it doesn't make sense to them, it's probably not going to make sense to somebody else. So go back and review it, make sure that it's there, and make sure that it meets the needs. Think about quality, not quantity. This is not about the amount that you put in. This is about quality, stuff that's meaningful, stuff that's going to align to the criteria and make it easy for the assessor to say yes and take you on to the professional discussion, which we call getting your ticket to the dance. So you bought your ticket, now we're going to take you on to the dance. So think about all these things that we've talked about when you're doing your written submission, and think about how you make a difference. What differences have you made? Who have you made that difference for? Now, this is a good point to say to you, we don't want to know who in terms of anything that's identifiable. So if you're working for Mr. Smith at Barclays Bank and you've made a huge difference for them, be careful to follow the confidentiality rules. I was working with a senior manager in a finance organization. Is fine. I was working for Mr. Smith or working with Mr. Smith in Barclays Bank will get your submission rejected. Now, can't say that enough really, because there's huge issues around confidentiality, and there's huge issues around what we call halo effect as well. So the confidentiality is the biggest one, but in terms of halo, it's not going to make any difference if you say you were working for Barclays, or you say you were working for Santander, or the Bank de Paris, or whoever it was. If you're in finance, that's not going to add any weight to this, because we're not assessing them, we're assessing you. We're not assessing the quality of your customers. We don't want to know about them. We want to know which industry you were working in, and that's as much as we need to know. That's really important, because you will get your submission rejected if it breaks any of the confidentiality rules. So when you're gathering evidence, think about these things. Think about collecting your evidence. Collect as much evidence as you can. If you're on a training program now, start collecting your evidence straight away. Have it in a drawer, have it in a box, have it somewhere you can get to it and decide what you want to use. Collect as much as you can. Select the best of that that shows you in your best light possible. Connect that to the dots of the criteria and make sure that it does connect to the criteria framework, because if it doesn't, it's not really adding anything. And you have a limited word count on the application form. So you need to get the right things in there that are going to make a difference. And then before you submit it, before you hit the button, reflect on it, make sure that it still meets the criteria and it's there for a reason, and get somebody else to have a look at it. Think about all those things as you're going through this process. Don't do this on your own in isolation unless you're incredibly confident you know exactly that it meets everything that we want and it's written in language that we can all understand. So once we've got through that process, we take you on to the professional discussion. And the professional discussion happens virtually. By and large, it will happen on what system we use, Google Meet. It will be recorded for posterity. And it will be recorded for two reasons. One, so that the assessor can revisit it to make sure that the decisions they make about your assessment are accurate and actually reflect what they've seen and what they've heard. And it's also recorded in order that we can moderate it as well. So some of the, as I mentioned with the written submissions, some of the professional discussions will be moderated. A moderator will go in and make sure that the assessor has made the correct decision. So those recordings are kept for as long as needed, so that they can be reviewed and revisited. But they will be recorded. So be prepared for that to happen. You will need to bring some identification with you to that session so that we can see that you are who you are supposed to be and you're the person that's supposed to be being assessed. They will last approximately an hour, but we say to people, make sure you've got at least an hour and a half in your diary. The worst thing you can do is to try and squeeze the professional discussion in amongst other things. And really, when you're having your professional discussion, treat us as your most important client for that hour and a half. Treat this as a real submission, a real pitch, if you like. That will give you the best opportunity of being successful at this. We have seen a couple of occasions where people have said, I've got to go, you said 9 till 10, I've got to go at 10, I've got another meeting. Or I'm sorry, I'm late, I was in another meeting before I got here. If you put yourself in that position, you're not going to succeed. The people that have done that haven't succeeded because they haven't given it enough effort and enough time. Make sure that when you come to the professional discussion, you actually turn up. And I don't mean physically, I mean mentally. Make sure that you're there, ready to deal with what's going to happen, prepared, engaged, fully involved in the process. That will give you the best opportunity to succeed as well. We will be validating the evidence that you've put in your written submission. We'll be asking you questions about that, and any areas that we've decided are weaker than others, we will pry into a little bit more as well. And there will be a discussion that relates to CPD as well as ethics and all the other criteria as well. So, a bit of a hint here, be prepared to deal with an ethics question. Be prepared to talk about your continuous professional development. It's not a Q&A. We won't be saying to you, here's the first question, right? Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next one. It is a real professional discussion with two peers. You can fail this. It is not a test, but you can fail. Make sure you leave enough time. Make sure you turn up. Give yourself the best opportunity possible. And if you want, I would say practice this with a colleague as well. If you've got a colleague you can trust, get them to challenge, get them to look at your submission, pick out some areas they want to talk to you about and take you through that process. Be a consultant during that process. Think about how you've made a difference, how you've added value, how you've helped your clients. It's about I, Captain. It's about me, 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 me. We don't want to hear about your firm. We don't want to hear about your team. We want to hear about you. Now, this is really difficult for a lot of us because we grew up in a culture where that's not really encouraged. We grew up in a culture where we say, oh, it's about us. It's about the team. It's about we. Well, for this hour and 20 minutes, we want to hear about you and just about you and how you have done the things that you say you've done. And a good question to ask yourself here is, if this was flipped around and you were assessing yourself, would you give the status? Would you give yourself the status? And if so, why? And if not, why not? What's missing? What are you not telling us that you need to tell us? So we ask you we ask you to talk about all the things you've put in your written submission. We ask you to talk about some things more than others, and we will dig into particular areas. But you need to think about this in terms of the ethical test. If you were doing this in front of your best client, how would they feel about this? If you were doing this in front of your friends and family, would you be proud of how you're dealing with this, how you're turning up, how you're approaching the discussion with the other professional, how you're looking at your written submission? If your performance today ended up on the front page news tomorrow, would you be proud of that? And if not, you need to think about this again before you get into the professional discussion. Now, the professional discussion is arranged between you and the assessor. So if you need to change that, assessors are fairly flexible. If you do it an hour before, that's not really acceptable. But if you get a couple of days before and you think, I can't do this, I need to just rebook this, then go ahead, contact your assessor and rebook it. We have that flexibility. We want you to be as prepared for this as possible. We're not going to say to you, right, we've got your written submission, next Monday, 9 o'clock, we're going to do your professional discussion. That's not how it works. That's arranged between the two of you. We want you to succeed at this. We're not going to waste your time and we're not going to waste our time. There are no trick questions here. This isn't messing about. This is a serious professional discussion between you and another peer. And we want to hear how good you are and why we should give you ChMC. We want to know how you've made that difference, what it is about you that puts you head and shoulders above everybody else in terms of receiving this status. Turn up, take it seriously, think of us as your main client. We're not giving this to people. This doesn't make any difference where you are in the organization. We've had people fail at very high levels and we've had people succeed at very low levels within the organization. Bring your best A game to this and let us know why we should give you the status. Now, sometimes you will get referred. There will be times when you get your submission referred. And if you get your submission referred, and I apologize, this is out of date. If you get your submission referred, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It gives you an opportunity to polish, review, look at what you've submitted, check that it still makes sense against the criteria, and get it in again. You get 14 days if you get a referral to resubmit your application, to do what you can to get your ticket to the dance, to get to that professional discussion and tell us how good you are. So if you do get a referral, don't think it's the end of the world. And my big takeaway from this is treat this as a real pitch. Treat us as your most important client for that hour and a half that you're with us, hour to hour and a half that you're with us. But remember, you are the engagement. Why should we give you this status? Why should anybody pay you what they pay you? Why should we engage with you? Having this status will tell your clients exactly why they should do that. So help us to help you be prepared for this, do the best that you can, take it seriously, and you'll be successful. So that's the end of the presentation from me. I'm going to go back to the studio now and join our guest for this morning. We're going to have a little bit of discussion, then we'll take on some of your questions from the floor as well. Good morning, David. Welcome and thanks for joining us today. Really good to have you here with us today.
Good to have you too.
Can you hear me okay, David?
Yes, coming through loud and clear.
Brilliant. Now, to anybody that's listening, David has been through the process and holds the status, and he's talking to us today about his own experience about how that went for him. So I wonder if we can start, David, by telling us start at the beginning of the process, if you like, and thinking about the written submission. What was the most challenging thing you found about the written submission?
So I think always when sort of applying to these written applications, first thing I think everyone does is scroll down and see how many pages you've got to fill in. And actually quite pleasing to see that it's a pretty concise application given all the things that you're asked to talk about. That very quickly becomes the challenge, I think, and being able to really concisely respond to the application using all of the experience that you have had and getting that into the word count you need to get is quite tricky. And so I guess part of that is a written response and how you sort of respond to it in terms of that written technique. But actually it's much more than that. And so for me, the main challenge was getting the competencies and the assessment criteria really clear in my head and understanding exactly what I needed to answer and I needed to cover. But then also making sure that I thought about what were the most important things that I thought I had done and do as a management consultant and making sure that they're front and center, and clearly bringing those things together so it's sort of a balanced application that covers all of the different things that are within the criteria. And I guess my final sort of reflection on that challenge is making sure that you do tell that story and the narrative is through that written submission. If it's a long list of bullet points, you will run out of space very quickly, and actually it won't be engaging for the person reading it. So how do you really get that story of what you are as a consultant in the limited word count that really is there?
I think that's a really important point, isn't it? We hear a lot about storytelling nowadays, and it is a really useful way of communicating. And you mentioned there that the word count as well, and the word count is quite tight, isn't it? And I don't make any apologies for that. I think, being concise in communication at the level that we're all operating at, I think is really important. And if you think about this not as an academic approach, but as a real world thing, if you're pitching to a client and a client says, I want 2 sides on how you can make a difference, and if you submit them a whole folder full of sheets of paper, they're not going to look at it. They're not going to engage with you because that you're not giving them what they've asked for. And that's not why we're doing this, but we are making people think about keeping their communication concise and brief and accurate, and telling that story in as few words as possible. One thing I would suggest to anybody who's listening really is, once you've written your submission, go through it. If you take out every other word, does it still make sense? If it does, you've probably got more space to add more to beef up the quality of the submission. So once you've got through that process, David, and you went on to the professional discussion, what would you say was the biggest challenge within the professional discussion itself?
So, and I think you've definitely spoken to some of this through the presentation, Dave, but I completely agree. There were no trick questions. So the questions asked were very clearly related to the competencies and to the submission, but they were also challenging. So they were digging into really what it meant in some of the areas that you would have responded to, and to really provide that evidence. So I think being really prepared around the evidence is key. Clearly, it's an hour and a half or an hour, and it goes very quickly. So having that evidence in front of you in whatever form you like to organise your thoughts is really key, and making sure that you know how that relates to the competencies, because obviously that will be the driving force of those questions. So very quickly thinking about what the evidence is that you're to back up the point you're making is key. And I guess to that as well, the challenge is making sure that you're using the time for as best as a conversation can have. So while setting some of the context is important, I think getting to the point really quickly is key, making sure that you're focusing on why it proves the sort of point you're making. And then another point that was definitely made through the presentation that I would agree with, and I do think is really tricky, is the point about talking about what you have done. And obviously working in a team is a really key part of management consultancy and is the driving force of what we do very often, whether that be with clients or with our staff. And so thinking about the role you play in that team is really key, because I don't think any of us are suggesting that teamwork is not a really key part of success. So it's actually identifying what you've done as part of that team. And that requires a bit of thought ahead of time, I would say, and making sure that's the bit that you talk about in the professional discussion. And I think finally, just reflecting on some of the questions that probably I didn't answer as well as some of the others that I did, making sure that you really understand the question. And clearly, while this is a discussion between management consultants, management consultancy is not a tick box exercise. So really understanding the context in which you work in and making sure that it makes sense to the person on the other side of that interview, keeping it sort of plain language and a plain discussion around what you've done is really key, so that they understand what you're talking about.
I think that's so important, isn't it? We talk about language all the time, and it's easy to get stuck into language that you use in a particular team, language that you use in a particular environment with a client, and forget that people outside of that potentially don't understand the language. Now, I don't mean management consultancy language, but there are areas that we all work in that are very specialist areas that we can easily get tied up in. And I think while we're thinking about that as well, we all have areas of expertise, don't we? But the status is really about a broader approach to management consultancy. And how did you make sure that you were able to get across to the assessor that you were a broader practitioner rather than just focusing on potentially a specialist area?
Yeah, and that's definitely a challenge. And I myself do work so almost entirely in public sector consultancy. That's mainly within space of working with health or local authorities. So my day-to-day work is fairly specialised. And I guess it's key to remember that that's not what's being assessed, and sort of having that front of mind, that this is about management consultancy and not about testing your knowledge of that particular area of an industry. And of course, that doesn't mean that the knowledge isn't important. So showing in those competencies that you understand the client environment that you work in, being able to provide that expert support to clients is important. But bringing it back, therefore, to the competencies of how you do that, as opposed to trying to show that you know everything about the latest health policy that's come out in the last few months, or how organisations specifically work. And again, I think it's therefore about making sure that you're using some of that knowledge to tell a story, but always going back to actually what that means for you as a management consultant, and why that proves that you are a good management consultant. And again, I think we've made the point, but that sort of plain language, and making sure you're not using jargon from that specialist industry or language that the person's not going to understand.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah. So I think the final thing I wanted to talk to you about, really, and you know, you're very welcome to stay with us and pick up on any of the questions that come from the floor. That would be really helpful as well. But thinking about your own experience and reflecting back on the process for you, if there was one piece of advice you would give about the assessment process, what do you think it would be?
So, and this is definitely sort of reflecting back that actually, as an opportunity, it was a really good time to reflect more generally about management consultancy, both the work we've done before and the work that I want to do in the future. And I don't say that as a sort of something that you should say, but actually the reality was, in doing that, it made the activity, the task, much easier and much more fulfilling. So I think when you go through the application, certainly when you come to the professional conversation, you realise how important it is that you are talking genuinely, that you are really getting to what matters to you as a management consultant, not simply about generic statements on management consultancy. And actually, if you're going to effectively build that evidence and make it believable and show the real detail and value within the evidence you're talking about, that reflection period is really important, and making sure that you are pulling out the things that matter to you individually, because I think that will really shine through and hopefully shine through in sort of professional conversation, and will be a much better tool in improving your competency than if you are trying to find generic statements that anyone could be saying.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's really, really sound advice. Thank you for that. I think we've got some questions now from the floor. So if you're happy to stay with us, David, we could take those on.
Yep. So we are just going to do a couple of pre-submitted questions, and then we'll go to the live questions. So is it possible to work towards a ChMC whilst operating outside of the industry, albeit the work and environment have strong synergies?
It's possible to work towards it in terms of collecting evidence, if that evidence relates to the criteria, and if that evidence demonstrates that you're operating as a management consultant. Otherwise, it isn't. The criteria are that you have to have a minimum of 5 years operating as a management consultant, not just a manager.
Okay, thank you. And a question from Leonard. Having been badly affected by lockdown and made redundant in March, not working since, would this count against a successful application?
First of all, I'm sorry to hear you were made redundant as part of the lockdown, Leonard, and I hope you find something soon. I'm sorry to hear that you've not been working since. It wouldn't count against you, except that you still need to show 5 years working in a minimum of 5 years working in the industry. So if you can demonstrate that, that wouldn't count against you. You know, life happens, things happen to people, but that's the main criteria.
Thank you. A question from Charlotte. When is it possible to start the on-program route?
Again, once you can start the submission process once you've got a minimum of 5 years experience working in the industry. However, if you're on program now, I would start collecting evidence now, because anything that you collect now, go through that collect, select, connect and reflect process when you're ready to submit. But I wouldn't wait till you've got 5 years and then go back and look for evidence. I would start collecting evidence now as you go through the process.
Thank you. This actually links into, I believe, Borislav's question, who said it's a wonderful concept. They're still young in the profession and don't quite have the 5 years of consulting management experience. Would you suggest they become a certified management consultant first? Or like you said, just start gathering the evidence now?
I think that that's a really interesting question, Borislav, and I think that I would say do the two. And I say do the two because there's a difference. Becoming a certified management consultant won't in itself get you chartered management consultant status. But it is a training program, and it will reflect on your training and your understanding and knowledge of the industry. But you still need to have minimum of 5 years experience as a management consultant before you can apply for the process. Having the certified, the CMC, won't by itself get you to chartered management consultant. You will still need to go through the assessment process after a minimum of 5 years.
Thank you. A question from Justin. Is this recognised around the world, or is it only relevant in the UK? And maybe, David, if you have some international experience, maybe you could have your input on this as well.
Yeah, over to you, David.
Fine, yeah, perfect. So I think really key about the reasons why I wanted to become a chartered management consultant is working across such a huge, broad number of clients. I'm more specific in my industry, but certainly have done international experience as well. It's quite difficult to really understand what it means to have a high-performing management consultant team working with you compared to essentially management support or other levels of support that by all means are very valuable, but is a different level of support. So while clearly the completing this within the UK brings its own sort of relevance for UK, it's something that I'm really proud to have on the CV, and certainly is something that international clients will recognise and will talk to me about. And so it is one of those things that, coming from a recognised institution like CMI and backed up by government, etc., is going to be a really important part of proving that we are providing a professional service that people can really rely on. And I think that will have relevance wherever the client is coming from.
Yeah, absolutely right, David. And to follow that up, in answer to the question, it is becoming internationally recognised, but it's early days. It's only been a couple of years in this country through the pilot phase of developing this, but it will become internationally recognised, yes.
That's great. I think it's always interesting to hear, not just from our perspective, but from David's as well, as someone who's putting it into everyday practice.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So our next question is from Justin. Does the nominated sponsor need to be a ChMC member?
Ultimately, yes. That is the goal. But we recognise that not everybody at the moment is able to do that. But they do need to be somebody who is a person of good standing, shall we say, recognised within your organisation or recognised within your wider network as somebody who knows what they're talking about, in order that they can make a decision on whether they feel your submission is an appropriate reflection of you.
That's great. And just a clarification question. How does the moderation take place? If you could maybe just give us like a quick step-by-step, just to confirm this is what happens.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the moderation is a back office internal process, if you like. So you will go through an assessment process with an assessor, and then you can think of moderation really as assessing the assessor to make sure that their decision is valid and justifiable, to make sure that their decision is derived through a fair and transparent process. So we pick a random number of the submissions to go through and make sure that the assessor has dealt with them appropriately and fairly across the board. So it's a back office double check that your result is justified. Yeah,
and obviously a lot of other qualifications have moderation as well. So
yeah,
It's not just us putting that in place.
No, that's a standard thing across assessment, really. You have a second stop to say, yes, the assessor, you've come to this decision. Have you come to it fairly? Have you come to it transparently? Are you showing any bias? Are you favouring one type of applicant over another? Are you demonstrating rigour when you're the same amount of rigour when you're dealing with assessments?
That's great. And we have time for one final question, which is from Leonard again. Thank you for putting all your questions in today. As a chartered accountant and a member of the Institute of Directors and the Worshipful Company of Management Consultants, he has a huge amount of experience. Is it still worth him attempting to achieve the ChMC status?
That's a really interesting question, and I think this sounds like slopey shoulders, but it's not meant to be. I think you're the only one that can answer that question, Leonard. And I think the big question for me is, are you working in the industry as a management consultant? Are you intending to continue to work in the industry as a management consultant? And if you are, I would say, yes, go for it. If you're not, you'll find it difficult to get the status in the first place. And if you're not working in the industry or have no plans to continue to work in the industry, I wouldn't go through the process just to get a badge. No. So I think you're the only one that can answer that question. But if you're in the industry, yes. If you're not, I would ask yourself why you want it.
Absolutely. So that's it for today's session. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and thank you, David, and of course, special guest David, for your insights and expertise. For any additional information and guidance, please contact your firm's ChMC Programme Manager or a member of the ChMC team at chmc@managers.org.uk. A recording of this webinar will be made available to all those who registered, and we will include a copy of the slides as well that has been asked in the questions. Use the link in the live chat to book on to the next session taking place on Wednesday, the 8th of September. And please do take a few minutes just to let us know your thoughts on today's event by completing our evaluation form. We've also included a link in the chat there for you as well. So thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.